The 2000 check millions are still waiting for right now. Millions of Americans are quietly waiting for an answer. You may have heard about a possible $2,000 tariff dividend check. Some headlines make it sound close. Others suggest it's already decided. But the truth is more complicated and far more uncertain than most people are being told. This is not a normal stimulus program. There is no approved payment schedule, no official distribution date, and no guarantee that a check will ever be issued at all. For seniors living on Social Security, a pension, or fixed savings, that uncertainty matters. Because for many households, $2,000 is not extra money. It's grocery money, prescription money, property tax money. It's breathing room. The reason everything feels frozen right now is not because the government forgot. It's not because there's no money. And it's not because a decision was quietly canceled. It's because the Supreme Court has not ruled yet. Until that decision comes down, no one has the legal authority to move forward. Not Congress, not the Treasury, not any federal agency. Everything is on hold. And that's where the danger begins, when people start planning around money that does not yet legally exist. This video will break down what this $2,000 proposal really is, why it's tied to the Supreme Court, and what seniors should and should not expect while waiting. Why this $2,000 is not a traditional stimulus check. One of the biggest sources of confusion right now is the word check. When people hear about a $2,000 payment, they naturally think of past stimulus programs, automatic payments, clear eligibility rules, direct deposits that arrived with little warning. But this proposal is fundamentally different. The so-called tariff dividend check is not tied to an emergency relief law. It is not part of Social Security, and it is not backed by a standing program that already exists. Instead, this idea is based on tariff revenue, money collected from taxes placed on imported goods. Those tariffs are paid by companies bringing products into the United States, not by individual consumers directly. Here's the critical point many headlines leave out. That money does not belong to the public by default. It flows into the general federal budget just like other government revenue. Before a single dollar could ever be sent to households, lawmakers would need legal authority to redirect it. And that authority is exactly what's being questioned right now. This is why no agency can issue guidance. It's why there's no eligibility chart. And it's why no one can honestly say, yes, this check is coming. Calling it a stimulus makes it sound familiar and guaranteed. In reality, it's a proposal dependent on legal interpretation, political agreement, and future legislation. Understanding this distinction matters because treating this like past stimulus checks can lead people to expect certainty where none exists, where the tariff money comes from and where it really goes. To understand why this $2,000 check is so uncertain, we need to be very clear about where the money actually comes from. Tariffs are taxes placed on imported goods. When companies bring products into the United States, electronics, appliances, raw materials, they pay these taxes at the border. That money is collected by the federal government. But here's the part many people don't realize. Once tariff money is collected, it does not sit in a special account labeled for Americans. It goes straight into the general federal treasury, mixed together with income taxes, payroll taxes, and other government revenue. That means tariff revenue is already being used. It helps fund government operations. It offsets budget deficits. It supports existing obligations. By the time anyone talks about sending checks to households, that money is no longer waiting. It has already been absorbed into the system. For a tariff dividend check to happen, Congress would need to take a separate action. Lawmakers would have to legally redirect part of that revenue back to the public, and that redirection must be clearly authorized under the law. This is why the Supreme Court matters so much here. If the court rules that the tariffs themselves were imposed improperly, the government may not even be allowed to keep that money, let alone distribute it. So before discussing checks, timelines, or eligibility, the most basic question has to be answered first. Is this money legally available at all? Until that question is settled, everything else remains speculation. Why the Supreme Court is the final gatekeeper. At this stage, everything comes down to one institution, the Supreme Court of the United States. This is the reason millions of people are waiting, and why nothing can move forward yet. The court is currently reviewing whether certain tariffs were imposed under valid legal authority, specifically whether they were enacted using emergency powers that may have exceeded what the law allows. This may sound technical, but the consequences are very real. If the Supreme Court rules that those tariffs were applied improperly, the government may be required to undo them. That could include returning money to the companies that paid those tariffs in the first place. And if that happens, there is no legal basis for sending that money to the public. On the other hand, if the court upholds the tariffs as lawful, the government keeps the revenue. Only then does the conversation about possible distribution even begin. This is why lawmakers are silent. This is why agencies cannot issue guidance. And this is why no one, no matter what they claim online, can promise a check. Until the court rules, every proposal is frozen in place. For seniors, the key takeaway is this: there is no hidden delay and no secret approval waiting to be announced. The process is paused by law, and while that uncertainty is frustrating, understanding why things are stalled helps prevent false hope and unnecessary financial planning around money that may never arrive. The two possible Supreme Court outcomes and what they mean at this point, everything hinges on one decision, and that decision has two very different possible outcomes. The first scenario is that the Supreme Court upholds the tariffs. If that happens, the tariff revenue already collected remains legally valid. The government keeps the money, and only then does the door stay open, at least in theory, for Congress to debate whether some portion of that revenue could be returned to the public. But even in this best-case scenario, nothing happens automatically. There is no trigger that sends out checks. Lawmakers would still need to pass new legislation. They would need to decide who qualifies, how much would be paid, and when or if it would happen at all. So even with a favorable ruling, a $2,000 check is possible, not promised. The second scenario is far more limiting. If the Supreme Court rejects the tariffs, the revenue collected may no longer belong to the government. In that case, the money could be required to go back to the companies that paid it, not to households. If that happens, the idea of a tariff dividend check effectively ends. There would be no legal pool of money to distribute, and any expectation of a payment would need to be reset immediately. This is why waiting for the ruling matters so much. Each outcome leads to a completely different financial reality, and planning before knowing which path is chosen carries real risk. Why a positive court ruling still does not guarantee a check. This is the point where many people misunderstand what happens next. Even if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the tariffs, even if the government keeps every dollar of that revenue, a $2,000 check is still not guaranteed. Here's why. The court does not authorize payments to the public. It only decides whether the tariffs themselves are legal. What happens to the money after that is a political decision, not a judicial one. Once the legal question is settled, Congress would still need to act. Lawmakers would have to introduce legislation specifically authorizing a tariff dividend. They would need to debate how much money could be used, who would receive it, and whether sending checks is even the best use of those funds. And that debate is far from simple. Some lawmakers may argue the money should be used to reduce deficits. Others may push to offset rising government costs. Some may support targeted relief instead of universal payments, and some may oppose redistribution entirely. All of that takes time and agreement. So a positive court ruling does not mean checks are printed the next day. It only means the conversation can legally begin. For seniors, this distinction is critical, because expecting money simply because the court rules one way creates false certainty. And false certainty can lead to financial decisions that are hard to undo. Until Congress acts, a tariff dividend remains a possibility, not a plan. Why Congress may choose not to send checks at all. Even if the Supreme Court clears the legal path, there is still a hard truth many people don't want to hear. Congress may decide not to send checks at all. That possibility is very real. When lawmakers look at tariff revenue, they don't automatically see money meant for households. They see budget pressure, they see deficits, they see rising costs tied to healthcare, defense, interest on national debt, and existing obligations that already strain federal finances. In that environment, sending $2,000 checks to millions of people is not an easy decision, politically or financially. Some members of Congress argue that distributing cash increases inflation. Others believe tariff revenue should be used to stabilize government finances instead of expanding direct payments. and some oppose the idea of broad payments entirely, preferring targeted programs or tax offsets instead. There is also another uncomfortable reality. Once money enters the general budget, it becomes part of a much larger negotiation. Tariff revenue competes with every other national priority: seniors, families, infrastructure, military spending. All of it ends up in the same discussion. That means even strong public interest does not guarantee action. For retirees, this matters because expectations shape decisions. Counting on a check that Congress may never approve can quietly undermine careful financial planning. Hope has value, but in situations like this, realism protects stability. Until Congress votes and signs a bill into law, a tariff dividend check remains an idea, not a commitment. The most common misunderstandings about the $2,000 check. As the conversation around this $2,000 check continues, misinformation has spread almost as fast as hope, and much of it comes from very understandable misunderstandings. The first major misunderstanding is the belief that the money already exists and is just waiting to be sent out. In reality, tariff revenue has already been absorbed into the federal budget. There is no separate account holding checks with people's names on them. The second misunderstanding is thinking that if tariffs are ruled illegal, Americans will get refunds. That's not how tariffs work. If refunds happen, they go back to the companies that paid them, not directly to consumers or retirees. Another common belief is that a Supreme Court ruling automatically triggers payments. It does not. The court only decides legality. It does not approve spending or distribution. There is also confusion around timing. Some people believe that once a ruling is announced, checks would arrive within weeks. In reality, even under the best conditions, legislation, budgeting, and distribution would take months, not days. Finally, many seniors assume that because prices went up due to tariffs, they are entitled to compensation. While that feeling is understandable, entitlement under the law works very differently than fairness in everyday life. Clearing up these misunderstandings is important, not to take away hope, but to prevent financial decisions based on assumptions instead of facts. Why seniors feel this uncertainty more than anyone else? This uncertainty doesn't affect everyone the same way. For seniors, it lands differently and much heavier. That's because retirement income is usually fixed. Social Security checks arrive in predictable amounts. Pensions rarely change. Savings are carefully stretched to last. There's little room for surprise and even less room for disappointment. When headlines suggest a possible $2,000 payment, it's natural for retirees to mentally assign that money a purpose. Groceries for a few months, catching up on utility bills, paying down credit cards, covering prescription costs. You don't have the flexibility younger workers often do. There's no overtime, no extra shifts, no easy way to replace money that doesn't arrive. That's what makes waiting so stressful. For working families, uncertainty may feel temporary. For seniors, it can feel personal because it touches daily necessities. Every delay forces quiet recalculations. Every unclear headline creates emotional whiplash between hope and restraint. There's also history at play. Many retirees remember stimulus checks that arrived quickly in the past. That experience creates an expectation that government payments, once discussed publicly, are likely to follow. But this situation is fundamentally different, and that difference hasn't always been explained clearly. Understanding why this uncertainty feels so intense doesn't make it disappear, but it does help explain why caution matters so much more in retirement. For seniors, financial stability isn't about optimism. It's about predictability. Why planning around this money can be risky. When money is uncertain, the biggest danger isn't disappointment. It's planning as if the money is guaranteed, when it isn't. For retirees on fixed incomes, even small assumptions can have large consequences. When a possible $2,000 check is mentally added to a budget, spending decisions quietly shift. Bills get delayed, purchases get postponed, emergency buffers shrink, and if the money never arrives, those decisions don't reverse easily. This is how risk enters the picture. Financial planners often say the same thing: never budget money that has not been legally approved and scheduled. Until a payment is authorized, funded, and dated, it should not be treated as real income. This is especially important here because the outcome depends on multiple layers: a Supreme Court ruling, congressional action, and political agreement. Any one of those can delay or end the process entirely. For seniors, the safest approach is boring but effective. Plan using the income you already receive: Social Security, pension checks, savings you can see. Anything beyond that should be treated as a bonus, not a necessity. That doesn't mean giving up hope. It means protecting stability. Hope feels good. Stability keeps the lights on. By separating what is certain from what is possible, retirees avoid the most painful outcome, building a plan around money that exists only in headlines. What seniors should do while waiting for the decision. While millions wait for the Supreme Court's answer, the most important question becomes a practical one. What should seniors do right now? The first step is simple but powerful. Separate facts from headlines. Headlines are designed to grab attention, not to guide financial decisions. Until a ruling is issued and Congress acts, there is no confirmed payment to plan around. The second step is to review your current budget using only guaranteed income. Look closely at Social Security, pension payments, and savings you already control. Make sure essential expenses, housing, utilities, food, and medications are covered without relying on possible future money. Third, if possible, rebuild or protect a small emergency buffer. Even a modest cushion can reduce stress while waiting. This isn't about saving large sums. It's about flexibility if costs rise or delays continue. Fourth, stay informed, but selectively. Rely on official court updates and reputable news sources, not social media speculation or viral videos promising certainty. And finally, protect your peace of mind. Constantly refreshing headlines does not speed up legal decisions. It only increases anxiety. Waiting is difficult, but waiting calmly with a clear plan based on what you already have puts seniors in a stronger position, regardless of how the court ultimately rules. Stability now is more valuable than speculation later. What not to do while everyone is waiting. While waiting for an answer, there are a few things seniors should be especially careful not to do. The first is not to count this money as guaranteed income. It may sound obvious, but many people do this subconsciously. They delay bills, they assume relief is coming, and if the decision goes the other way, those small delays can turn into real financial stress. The second thing to avoid is making purchases or commitments based on headlines. Headlines are often written to suggest momentum or certainty, even when none exists. Buying, borrowing, or committing funds in anticipation of a check that has not been approved can create problems that are hard to undo. Third, seniors should avoid falling for inside information. Claims that checks are already approved, money is waiting, or distribution is being finalized are not supported by any official source. No one outside the courts and Congress has advance confirmation. Another important warning is to avoid scams. Anytime potential payments are discussed publicly, scammers follow. Calls, texts, or emails claiming to help release your $2,000 check are not legitimate. Finally, avoid letting uncertainty dominate your daily life. Constant worry does not influence court rulings or legislation. It only affects health and peace of mind. Waiting wisely means staying grounded, not frozen by hope or fear. How to think about this $2,000 check in a healthy way. At this point, the most important issue is not whether the $2,000 check happens. It's how you think about it while waiting. A healthy way to approach this situation is to treat the possible check as extra, not essential. If it happens, it can help. If it doesn't, your financial foundation should still stand. That mindset protects you from two harmful extremes. The first is false hope, planning emotionally and financially around money that has not been approved. That can quietly weaken your sense of security. The second is constant fear, worrying every day about an outcome you cannot control. That stress doesn't change court rulings or congressional votes. It only takes a toll on your health and peace of mind. The reality is this: no one waiting right now has done anything wrong. The system is simply in a legal pause, and pauses by nature feel uncomfortable, but stability in retirement is built on what you can control: your budget, your spending pace, your expectations, your emotional response to uncertainty. Thinking clearly means saying, "I'll be ready either way." If the check comes, it's a relief, not a rescue. If it doesn't, life continues without disruption. That perspective doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it prevents uncertainty from controlling you. And for seniors, that calm, more than any single payment, is a form of financial security. The final takeaway: stability comes from clarity, not headlines. As we reach the end of this update, The most important takeaway is not about courts, tariffs, or checks. It's about clarity. Right now, the truth is simple. The $2,000 tariff dividend check is not approved. It is not guaranteed. And it is entirely dependent on decisions that have not been made yet. That doesn't mean it will never happen, but it does mean no one should live as if it already has. For seniors, financial security has never come from headlines or political speculation. It comes from knowing exactly what income you can count on and building your life around that certainty. Everything else should be treated as a possibility, not a promise. Waiting is difficult, especially when money could make a real difference. But waiting wisely means protecting your budget, your peace of mind, and your independence, regardless of how this issue is resolved. If the check eventually comes, it should feel like a bonus, not a rescue. And if it doesn't, your stability should already be intact. That is the difference between hope that helps and hope that harms. In times like this, the strongest position is not optimism or pessimism. It's prepared realism. Clarity brings calm, and calm is one of the most valuable assets in retirement.